hoping for today are for you to, first of all, recognize the importance of connecting with a major professor or a faculty advisor. Right? That is sort of step one in this whole process. Right? The sort of barrier for entry is identifying someone you will work with in graduate school. Okay? I want for us as panel members and any of you who have experiences to share as well, to share strategies for identifying a major professor in a graduate program that suits your interests. And then to share strategies for reaching out and making that first contact with a major professor, okay? Because that isn't obvious how to do that, and it doesn't always feel very natural to reach out to someone out of the blue, by email and introduce yourself and say, hey, I read all your papers, I'm really interested in your work. Even though that's basically what you're supposed to do, it doesn't feel all that comfortable at first, okay? And then finally, to recognize that this process is challenging, okay, and it requires a lot of time and a lot of investment on your part. And then success can depend on a lot of things that are outside of your control, all right? And so getting on top of this process early and being persistent is really what's sort of key to your success, okay? So that's sort of my introduction. I want to talk less now moving forward, but I wanted to sort of let our panel members give an introduction to themselves. I think we sort of recognize most.
Yeah, some of the names off panel.
Okay, so that means you have to sit there. I should put the names on the seats. I'm sorry. Since we all sort of probably know each other by name, I wanted to give you guys a chance to introduce yourselves in a different way that's sort of germane to what we're talking about, which is to answer a couple of questions, right? So at what point in your life did you decide that you wanted to go to graduate school, right, and pursue your specialty, okay? And what was your path to graduate school, okay? So however you want to answer this. We'll start on this end.
Oh,
and make our way over.
Damn, I should stay back there. My path to graduate.
And keep in mind that we have
Yeah.
a number of panelists.
Maybe we should start at
I had a professor who I really enjoyed taking classes with, and I had absolutely no exposure, no mentoring at all about graduate school, and now a graduate student, and worked out that I could stay on at that school to get my master's, kind of like a 5-year master's, only it took 2 years. And that was for a master's. And for PhD, I did the business of reading all the papers and corresponding with the professor the way you're supposed to do. So that's my story.
Shorter than I was anticipating. Let's see, my story. Well, I don't know. I was a weird kid, so I think I was 8 when I decided I was going to be a marine biologist. And I grew up in Virginia, and we had really nice schools for that year. And so my dad used to get the VIMS newsletters at home, so I grew up reading those. And so I just assumed that that's where people went to school. And I think when I was just a kid, I just felt like, you go all the way through. So PhD is the best thing to do, which is not the case for everybody. So I think that's a point that I wanted to make. So I actually started with a master's degree first, just to kind of test the waters to make sure that academia was where I wanted to stay. And then I went elsewhere for a PhD.
Good. Well, I can't remember a time I wasn't interested in plants, but I think coming to being a plant scientist didn't happen until later. I also was really into teaching when I was a kid. Maybe 4th grade, I had a whole shelf of textbooks, including some teacher's editions, and I made my mom buy me a grade book so that I could make up students and make up grades.
Wow.
So it wasn't until I was in college that I really settled on wanting to be a professor. That I think I was bound to be some kind of teacher, but it was in college where I was excited about learning, wanting to learn more, and some of it might have just been seeing professors and and then picking a grad school, I actually picked schools by their programs first. I found some list somewhere of the top plant biology programs. I applied to 3 places. One was because I thought I could get in. The other 2, I think, may have been 1 and 2 on the list. Which is good at that. But I also did the process of identifying a professor who was there and communicating. And I'm very happy with where I went.
Okay. Well, mine's a really long story, and I won't tell you the whole story. But I decided to go to graduate school at 4 years of age because I already had a career. I taught elementary school, and I really liked it. But I missed hanging out with people like this, and that really was the deciding factor. I missed that public educators are some of the greatest people on earth, but I missed the science part of it because I have a passion not for plants, but for insects and reptiles and amphibians my whole life. And I honestly, when I went to graduate school, I had no intention of being a professor, but I knew I wanted to get a PhD in discipline and see where life took me. And it took me to Newport News, Virginia. And there's my brief version.
Yeah. Cool. Well, so on my end, I always had a childhood interest in wildlife in general, reptiles and amphibians mainly, but other things too. But really, honestly, didn't really hit me until college, and that's when it snowballed. When I was in college, most of the other students in my cohort, this was in central New Jersey, and most of them were going on to medical school or pharmaceutical, and I knew I was good at biology, and that got me there so far, So and what ended up happening was, it wasn't until my junior year that my advisor, who had not been around really much up to that point, I actually was able to actually meet with him. Later find out he's one of these preeminent rattlesnake biologists from going back to like the 70s and 80s. He's really well known, but he actually put me in contact and started saying there is another path, right? Because at the time I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. I just knew I liked biology, and then when I realized I could combine, my just general interest in nature with a career in academia, that's kind of where it kind of snowballed from there. And then just kind of follow sort of master's then PhD sort of usual straight through path, I guess.
Julie,
So Julie,
can you hear us?
Hello. Okay, well, first of all, greetings from Lawrence, Kansas. Thank you guys for having me buzz in today. I would say, as far as when I, once you go to grad school, I've pretty much always been on that track, I think. I've always just kind of assumed I would go to college, and then after that I was like, well, might as well keep this going. I've always loved science and research and learning things, and when I was a kid, like every other kid, I was obsessed with dinosaurs, and I've read books about them constantly, so that got me where I am now, which is a paleontologist in training. So I think for me it always just kind of made sense. I think my path so far has been pretty standard. I graduated from CMU December 2017, so I had like a gap semester before I started. Right now I'm kind of in the process of figuring out whether the path is going to stay standard or not. I'm thinking about taking a gap year, PhD, or just going straight for it, so check back in a few years.
Right. Okay, so thank you guys for sharing those stories. We'll get to some of the more specifics about the steps involved in that process of getting through that path. But I want to take a minute to let Dr. Stephen introduce our Master's in Environmental Science program, in case some of you are not aware of that program, since we're talking in a group of people who are interested in graduate school. It seemed like an appropriate venue for Dr. Stephen to sort of tell you some information that you should know at this stage about our own program here at CMU.
Good. So we have essentially 3 tracks. You can apply in your junior year for the 5-year program, which is a 5-year program if you are really on ball, or maybe a 6-year program for some students. So that involves starting to take graduate classes your senior year and identifying a thesis advisor when you apply, starting to work on your thesis, continuing that for a 5th year after you graduate until you get all your credits and finish a thesis. There's also the traditional program, which CNU students can apply for during their senior year and start as soon as they graduate. That's no problem. That typically takes 2 years for a thesis. There's also a non-thesis track that's coursework only and then comprehensive exams. The thesis track is good for students who want to go on into a career that involves some degree of fieldwork, research, sort of experiment skills, things like that. The non-thesis track is good for students who need foundational knowledge in environmental science, who maybe want to go into policy or teaching, and they don't need to do a thesis. But you should also be aware that seniors are allowed to take graduate courses, even if they're not enrolled in the program. So if you're So if you're considering graduate school, you should consider, you have to fill out a form, get permission, blah, 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 but you can take a graduate course each semester your senior year, and that can get you started on that path and get you a little grad student experience, which can be really helpful.
We have one student here who's done that already, Michael Montempo.
Yeah.
He took stats in
Mhm.
fall.
Oh, wonderful. Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah,
If
exactly.
you can.
Yeah. And then our program is a master's only program, and it serves students who know that they eventually want to get a PhD, but they don't feel super competitive for top PhD programs yet, and they need a little experience, they want to get a master's degree. It's also a good program for people who want a master's degree so they can get the job they want. Our program, thanks mostly to Dr. Atkinson, has lots of good connections with places that hire our graduates, with jobs that our students get after graduation. So it can be a very good career move. We have lots of connections in this area. Students go elsewhere and work too.
So thank you for that.
Do you guys have any questions about it? Any technical questions or philosophical questions? You know where to find me?
Yeah, Dr. Stephen is, I'm sorry I didn't give you the proper
I
introduction,
didn't
is
introduce
the
myself either.
graduate program coordinator, right, for our Masters in Environmental Sciences, so, which is why she's telling you about it.
Yeah.
And is so informed. And Dr. Atkinson was previously the grad group coordinator, so
And
he
so
can
is
also
Dr. Mike,
tell you lots.
Yeah.
So,
Dr. Thompson.
yeah, we can just go.
We rotate around the department.
Okay, but I think for the most part, our discussion will focus on searching outside of CNU, although certainly some of the principles apply to applying to our CNU program. But I think for the most part, our discussion will center on looking outside of these walls and searching for graduate programs and faculty advisors elsewhere. So I have a few planned questions, okay, just to sort of make sure our discussion goes in some good directions. However, you guys are welcome to jump in with any question or any follow-up question that you want to ask, okay? This is a session that's for you and for your information, okay? So jump in whenever you want, all right? But the first question I'm going to pose for our panel is, how did you find your major professor?
I'm gonna start first. We'll go that way.
Do you want us, we can start with Julie.
Okay,
Yeah.
Julie
You
first.
want to start?
Okay. So I purely use Google for me. I think once you get further into your field, you can start. That's when you start networking, and you go to conferences, and your advisor knows everybody in your field almost probably. But for me, I went from herpetology to paleontology, and I didn't know anybody in the field. So I pretty much just went to Google Scholar and looked for papers and articles and pretty much anything, and found my advisor and contacted him, and it worked out really well. You just have to be really diligent. So do good Google searches, not just science advisor.
So for me, for my master's, so in my undergrad, that's what kind of sprung me forward to going to graduate school and realizing I could connect those interests to an actual career. It was actually my undergraduate advisor that put me in contact with some potential advisors for a master's program. Given, I talked to him about my interests and what I was generally into, sort of behavior and ecology. And he gave me a couple of people to contact, and then I emailed them from there. And that's how I got involved in that end. By the time I finished the master's and went PhD, there were some options that my advisor had suggested, but I was definitely doing more of what Julie was saying, searching more broadly. And now I kind of knew a little bit more, kind of like Heather was saying about getting your feet wet in a master's. I kind of knew a little bit more what I wanted to do. So I kind of expanded from there and did more of those sort of library or Google Scholar type searches for keywords and topics I'd be into.